Hey friends, welcome or welcome back. My name is Shannon, and today we are going to talk about some Jane Austen nonfiction. A while back, I posted a video about some Jane Austen nonfiction that I wanted to read, but now I'm following up with a video on some recommendations of Jane Austen nonfiction that I have read. And we're going to start with my most recent read, and that is Jane Austen's Bookshelf, a rare book collector's quest to find the women writers who shaped a legend by Rebecca Romney. This came out only a couple months ago, and I had pre-ordered it, and I read it the moment that it arrived. This is a mix of literary history, feminist commentary, and personal memoir. Romney is a rare book dealer, and one day she came across an edition of Evelina by Frances Burney, an author that she had heard of, but really didn't know much about. She went about learning more and was surprised to learn that the term Pride and Prejudice came from Burney's novel Cecilia. Romney, who is an avid Austen reader, was intrigued, and she hadn't realized the connection between Austen and this random author from the late 1700s that may have inspired Jane Austen. And this book goes through Romney's quest to learn more about the female writers, not just Burney, that Jane Austen would have known about and read. Romney wants to find out, firstly, how they may have inspired Austen's writing, and most importantly, why these particular female authors fell out of favor. Why does everyone consider Austen to be the earliest and best of English novelists when there were so many other women that came before her? Romney says, to call Austen the first great woman writer in English really is to call her the first British woman accepted into the Western canon. Here, Romney covers several female authors: Frances Burney, Charlotte Lennox, Anne Radcliffe, Maria Edgeworth, Elizabeth Inchbald, Hannah More, Charlotte Smith, and Hester Lynch Thrale Piozzi. Romney goes through each author, their works that made them famous, how the works likely influenced Austen, the differences in writing styles, whether the writing could possibly be better than Austen, ooh, sacrilege, and the likely reason why that author fell out of favor of longevity. Romney says, I tried to identify moments when this happened, the turning points. Sometimes it happened suddenly, other times by degrees. But in each case, these writers went from the spotlight, acclaimed as geniuses, as good as Sappho, better than Fielding, to the shadows. Unsurprisingly, most of the authors that fell from the canon, it was due to misogyny. Not enough male writers or critics either in that time or in later years kept the conversation going or added their works to anthologies. However, in the case of Anne Radcliffe, it was the Gothic genre that actually fell out of favor. Radcliffe was probably more influential than Austen in her day. We wouldn't have Frankenstein or Dracula or Wuthering Heights or Northanger Abbey if not for Radcliffe. In the case of Maria Edgeworth, Romney argues that Edgeworth suffered from being downgraded from novelist to, quote, Irish novelist. Basically what happened was her stories were kind of pigeonholed into the regional box, and she was considered no longer universal. Universal, a key word in canonizing an author. It is also used to keep authors out of the canon. In one recent Austen book, the author quickly dismisses some writers of Austen's time who, quote, would never become household words. They lacked her own gift of universality, end quote. This is one way Edgeworth's slide into becoming an Irish novelist first hurt her broader legacy. Austen went from the narrow to the universal. Edgeworth went from the universal to the narrow. The fact that Austen survived so many years later is actually accidental. She was not a shoo-in for longevity. She was respected, but deemed limited. There were reprints of her books in the 1830s, several years after Austen had died, but it wasn't until 1869 when her nephew, James Edward Austen Leigh, published his memoir, which then gave critics material to essentially recontextualize Austen's writing. Never mind that the memoir was based on decades-old memories. But Anne Radcliffe didn't have a nephew writing about her, so her reputation was never revived. By the 1870s, Austen was being taught in schools, and here we are today, still obsessed with her. So it was completely accidental. It just so happened that somebody happened to be there to be her champion and keep her works to the forefront. And then, according to Romney, as the years went on, commentators and critics have used Austen as a way to keep other women out of the canon. I highly recommend this book. It was really, really informative, and I did like some of Romney's arguments that she puts forth. And the bibliography in here is chef's kiss, amazing. There's so many books in here that I actually want to try to find. Jane Austen, Writing, Society, Politics by Tom Keymer. This little book is basically an examination of themes in Austen's 6 completed novels, taking into account the social, political, and literary contexts of Austen's time. Now, many people complain that Austen's books don't say anything, that she doesn't actually touch upon anything of importance, but Keymer explains how beneath the surface of, courtship and domestic plots, Austen is subtly engaging with the major issues of the day: class, gender roles, education, and yes, even politics. It's such a slim book that I expected a whole bunch of fluff and or stuff that I already knew, but I was actually happily surprised to see that it's an actual work of literary exploration and criticism. Keymer goes through each of the novels and gives some great insight into the themes and historical context, and I underlined like half the book. He explores the terrors of Northanger Abbey and makes an argument that it's a novel about fear, not just making fun of Gothic novels. And yes, it is poking fun at Gothic novels, but it also highlights real fears of women and reveals modes of persecution and entrapment of society of the time. One of the things that Gothic literature did was highlight real fears about women. He makes the argument that Northanger Abbey is about fear. Now, Romney, from Jane Austen's bookshelf that I just talked about, makes a similar argument about Gothic novels in her chapter on Anne Radcliffe. And Romney points out that in Anne Radcliffe's novels, the heroines are constantly fainting, like all the time. It does not matter what happens. She's always fainting. And so here's what Romney says. There is a major reason beyond corsets and sensibility why fainting proliferated in novels of this period. Modern scholarship has demonstrated that women tend to faint in novels when what they really are trying to do is say no. They swoon when a man attempts to assault them, as in Samuel Richardson's Pamela. They swoon when they realize they're trapped by someone who wants to harm them, as in Radcliffe's Udolpho. In Udolpho, Emily's tendency to faint represents fear that she is unable to express. So Romney and Keymer are basically saying the same thing about Northanger Abbey. It's about fear. And that is something that it never occurred to me. I just thought it was just a fun book poking fun at Gothic novels, but it's actually a little bit more serious than that. He also explores the silence at Mansfield Park. Why would Jane Austen explicitly bring up the topic of slavery in one scene and then drop it? Keymer says, so what should we make of the profoundest silence of all, the dead silence that follows Fanny's attempt, soon after Sir Thomas returns from his Antigua estate, to initiate a conversation about the slave trade? And then you never hear about it again. And Keymer makes a really interesting argument, which is actually too long to go over here, so I highly recommend you pick up the book and check it out. A Jane Austen Education, How 6 Novels Taught Me About Love, Friendship, and the Things That Really Matter by William Deresiewicz. And I originally listened to this on audiobook, and then I bought a physical copy because I enjoyed it so much. And this is Deresiewicz's memoir that blends literary criticism with life lessons. He was a former Austen skeptic turned champion, and each chapter focuses on one novel and the specific insight that that particular novel gave him, kind of an emotional Bildungsroman. From Emma, he learned humility. From persuasion, he learned true friendship. From Sense and Sensibility, he learned how to truly fall in love. Now, you're not going to get anything mind-blowing in this book, but it really is interesting hearing how he came to the novels and how he learned to love them. I particularly enjoyed his chapter on Mansfield Park because I'm always looking for a reason to like Fanny Price and Mansfield Park, and his chapter on learning how to be good kind of made me warm to her a little bit. I may never truly love Fanny, but I'm trying. So like myself, Deresiewicz just could not get on with Fanny and just couldn't understand how or why Austen wrote it and wrote a character like her. It's just so different from her other novels. So Deresiewicz goes through a personal story about his friendship with some very wealthy and social climbing people in Manhattan, sort of comparing those people and lifestyle to the Bertrams and the Crawfords, while he, like Fanny, was never, ever going to belong and was always destined to be a spectator. And he also said that he believed Austen was intentional in creating such a stark difference between Fanny and Mary Crawford. I mean, Mary Crawford is just spectacular. She's Elizabeth Bennet with money. You know, she is just funny and witty, and she can be kind at times. She is just sparkling, while Fanny is just a boring drudge. And so that is intentional. I wasn't even sure that Austen expected us to like Fanny Price. She knew quite well that Fanny would be tough to love, but she wanted to draw the contrast with people like the Crawfords in the starkest possible terms. By not giving her heroine any kind of wit or charm to distract us, she forced us to focus on the things that really mattered about her. Elizabeth Bennet also had a generous heart, was also capable of being thoughtful and selfless, but with her glorious low lovability, who even bothered to notice? Reading about her, it was all too easy to imagine that Austen only cared about sparkle and wit. This is why she had to make her heroine in Mansfield Park so dull. This time, she took Elizabeth and split her personality in half. Mary got the charm, Fanny got the goodness, and we had to decide which one was better. Austen wasn't really condemning brightness and energy, I realized. She was just showing us that they aren't the most important things in life. So I found that really, really interesting. And, you know, I may never be friends with Fanny, but I can at least, learn to respect her a little bit. Jane Austen, Her Homes and Friends by Constance Hill. So I read this online because it's in the public domain. I don't actually have a copy of it, but I'll see if I can find a picture of it somewhere. This was published in 1901, and Hill retraces Austen's life through the places that she lived: Steventon, Bath, Chawton, and Winchester. This isn't an academic book at all, and instead Hill blends a little bit of biography with literary appreciation and some travel writing. She even speaks to people who knew the family. So in 1901, there would have been people still alive that remembered the Austen family, albeit they would have been elderly at that time. And I found this a very charming book, a very quick read. And if you're just looking for something about Jane Austen that will make you smile, I do recommend this. And like I said, it is in the public domain and you can find it online. Just do a quick Google and it'll pop up somewhere. Jane Austen, The World of Her Novels by Deirdre Faye. And this is a beautifully illustrated guide exploring the real life settings, customs, class structures, and daily routines that would have shaped Austen's writing. Faye discusses each of the finished novels, and also the Watsons and Sanditon, two of her unfinished novels. Part one of the book covers her family, the Regency, royalty, foreign affairs, changes in the countryside that were happening at the time, travel, social ranks, clerical life, occupations, fashion, etc. You get the point. And then part two discusses the novels and some of the real life locations mentioned in the novels, where the wealth of some of the characters came from, the real life military things that were happening at the time. And although not directly called out in the books, they are touched upon in Austen's references to the militia. I found this very enjoyable and very readable. It's a great introduction into Austen. And even though there wasn't much new information for me, I do highly recommend this book, regardless of whether you know little or know a lot. If you know little, it's a great introduction. And if you know a lot, it's a great refresher. And it's just beautiful. It's just some great pictures and illustrations and maps. So highly recommend. Now, I've talked about this next one several times on this channel, so I won't go into depth. And this is Jane Austen's Letters, edited by Deirdre Faye. Massive book. It contains all of the surviving letters written by Austen, mostly to her sister Cassandra, but there are a few others to other people sprinkled in there. And LaFay has just done an amazing job on this, because not only does it include all of the letters, it includes notes on the letters, and then it includes a bibliography, and also it includes a biographical index of all of the people mentioned in the letters and also her family. So amazing edition. This is the 4th edition. Fantastic, fantastic book. Cannot recommend it enough. Jane Austen at Home, a biography by Lucy Worsley. Now, similar to Constance Hill that I just talked about a few minutes ago, Worsley examines Austen's life through the places that she lived and also visited. While Hill's book was charming and whimsical, Worsley's book definitely has more meat to it and has lots of sources to back her up. So Worsley explores not only the locations that she lives, but also the rooms and the spaces and the possessions and the way in which home is used in Austen's novels. Most of Austen's heroines actually lose their homes. For example, the Dashwood sisters, or will eventually lose it, the Bennet sisters and the Elliot sisters, or have been taken from their home, Fanny Price. I read this several years ago, so it's due for a reread, but I do remember liking Worsley's writing. Becoming Jane Austen, the true love story that inspired the classic novels by John Spence. Now, I recommend this cautiously. I read it many, many years ago, so I can't remember everything about this book. I do remember thinking at the time that Spence was making a lot of leaps without anything to back him up on it. But I'll need to do a reread to remember exactly what that was. So that's why I recommend this cautiously. And so in this book, basically, Spence is taking Austen's nearly undocumented romance with Tom Lefroy and suggesting that it was deeper and more influential and, also inspired Pride and Prejudice. And again, I remember thinking that the evidence that he provided really didn't hold up, but unfortunately, I can't remember why. But there was one thing that Spence did say in here that did stick with me, and that's probably one of the reasons why I've kept this book. And that is, though Austen's novels advocate, marrying for love and affection, loving your partner in those days was actually dangerous. If you liked your partner, the more children you ended up with, and thus increasing the chances of dying in childbirth. And Spencer speculates that Austen never married because she watched all of her sisters-in-law be constantly pregnant, and she watched 2 of her sisters-in-law die in childbirth. For example, her brother Edward's wife Elizabeth died giving birth to her 11th child in 1808. And then her brother Charles's wife Frances died in 1814, giving birth to their 4th child. And then after Jane had died, her brother Frances's wife Mary died giving birth to her 11th child. So that's an argument that I can actually get behind. We don't know for sure, but I mean, it certainly was a scary prospect. Childbirth in those days by no means was assured that you would survive. But so like I said, I recommend this cautiously. Jane Austen, A Life by Claire Tomalin. This is another one that I read many years ago, so I can't entirely remember how I felt about it. So again, I recommend this cautiously. Tomalin is a well-known biographer, and I also have another one of her biographies, the one about Charles Dickens' mistress, Nellie Ternan. So this is a straight up biography, and it has some great notes in here, which is probably one of the reasons why I've kept it for so long. The bibliography is great, and the index was fantastic. For example, I was just talking about Austen's sisters-in-law. I used this index to locate the sisters to find out their exact dates of death due to childbirth. Sorry, sisters-in-law, not sisters. So even if I cannot entirely remember how I felt about Tomalin's version of Austen's life, it actually was and is a great resource for me. So that's why I keep it around. So that is it. Some Jane Austen nonfiction that I recommend, or cautiously recommend in the case of the last two. Have you read any of these? Let me know. I would love to hear from you. And let me know if you have any other Jane Austen fiction that I haven't mentioned in either this video or my previous TBR video. I would love to hear what you've been reading, and maybe I can add some of those to my TBR. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great day. Bye.